Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another live stream. This one's called Property Matters, and I have in the star seat, in the hot spot, as it were, Hamish McLay of Search and Convey. We talk about curious, more discrete elements of housing and the effects it can have. And also, today we're talking specifically about social housing and landlords. Hamish, can you add a little bit of colour to that?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. We know that the government, in its, I think, probably infinite wisdom, dumped the reform that they wanted to bring out because, like so many things, it isn't properly thought out by them before they introduce it. So it's something needs to be done. And it's just interesting, though, there's conflicting reports from different sort of sides as to what's the best way to handle it. So I thought the best thing we could do was to speak to somebody who was themselves, they are themselves a landlord, and they can actually tell us what these challenges are that people are sort of speaking about, because we keep hearing about rogue landlords, and then of course rogue landlords, landlords will say we've got rogue tenants. So where's it all happening? Where's it all, and what we do to resolve the situation if we can?
So let's bring to the stage our special guest today, Richard Aylward. Richard, welcome.
Hi there. Okay. Well, by introduction, I've been running properties for the last 25 years. So I started at the turn of the century, really. And the changes have been huge since I started, because there was really very little regulation when I started. And now there's a lot. A lot of it is necessary, to be perfectly honest, and I'm quite happy with it. But of course, the difficulty now is the tenant institutions such as shelter and generation rent have decided that all landlords are rogue landlords, more or less, and so are permanently lobbying the government to get their way through, and to our detriment. Now, I consider myself a good landlord, and some of what they say is reasonable, but to be perfectly honest, a lot of it is just not going to work, and it has to work for both tenants and landlords. It's not a question of one or the other. If you don't get a fair return, then you despise the person you're dealing with, and that's always worked okay for me in the past. And now the problem we've got has been created by the government. But I don't know if you wanted me to go on a bit more about where I think the problem lies at the moment,
Well, let's get to that. Hamish, from your perspective, obviously, I don't want to bang on about this too much, but the government's meddling, I suspect, to try and keep themselves in the public eye as positively as they can before they're forced to disband, has been the prima facie cause of the situation we're in now. But there are fundamentally basic problems here, yes?
Well, I think that the challenge is, and Richard outlined it, and it's why it's so good getting experts like Richard on board with us so we can actually sort of speak. We know full well from those of us who have spoken on Property Quorum that there are so many challenges because the right people are not being involved with the right discussion to sort all of the issues out. And like I was saying, you can actually you can create a dance or a battle, and it depends how you go about it. And unfortunately, because of the wrong people being listened to, and some serious stuff going on in on the legal side of property law at this stage in time, and it strikes me that from what Richard's saying, we've got the wrong bodies being listened to too much. Like he says, some of it's right, but you can't have all of it being right and then cancel out the good bits. That the landlords are there to make a living, but they also want to provide a service because they want the right relationship.
What's your perspective on this, Richard?
I completely agree with what Hamish is saying. The problem we've got now is that rogue landlords have been more or less invited to the party, as it were, and that's because the government policy has given them an opportunity. So what's happened now is good landlords are being vilified by the government because it makes good headlines for them, and the likes of Shelter and Generation Rent, they like to also run us down, and we're taxed on interest payments now, and we're legislated against in so many other ways, and therefore a lot of landlords, or good landlords, are leaving the profession.
One of my clients actually, and also another member of the Property Quorum, which you may have seen, Chris Gilson, was telling me only the other day that there seems to be a mass exodus of landlords.
I wouldn't say it's a mass exodus, but there is definitely an exodus, and there's less property available now than there were a few years ago, shall we say. And even if there's potentially the same amount, that's no good because the population's increasing, and so there's a greater demand on property. So what's happened is the government, it appears they don't really want a private rental sector. They want all landlords to be large, institutionalized corporations, etc. And then they don't want lots of little or lower level, if you like myself, people getting themselves up to a decent income, shall we say, and an opportunity to improve themselves past where they want us to go, if you like. That's probably a little bit of my opinion, but
do you think the government believe that people like you are getting beyond your station? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes. Well, not that we're getting beyond our station, but they don't want us getting. They don't want. The system won't work if everybody's rich, and so they need people to be doing the mundane jobs, working factories, and that's not to rubbish mundane jobs. I did one for 40 or 50 years, 40 years or so. So there's nothing wrong with that, but they don't want people moving away from that. So what's happened really is we've got more than 4.5 million households in the private rental sector, and about 20% of them, which is about 20% of the stock, that is, and over 80% of them, of those landlords, have between 1 and 4 properties. Well, there's no way large corporation can take on 3.75 million properties in just a few years, and so the government aren't able to get to house all the homeless, and there's a greater amount of homelessness as there are no longer enough properties for the number of people looking to rent.
Gosh.
Of course, add to that the fact that they're not building enough properties, and that's not helping at all. And then they've just made a disastrous situation for a lot of people.
Hamish, what can we do to alleviate the situation?
Well,
is there anything that can be done here?
Well, there are things being done. We're so fortunate that people like Richard and Chris, who we spoke of earlier, who are working very hard at trying to improve the social housing that's available. The government, by serious impositions one way or another, we take last year as an example, the number of new houses being built were dropped off almost totally after August because the developers weren't able to sell the houses. I mean, a lot of them like to sell off plan. So as Richard pointed out, we have got a population rising. In the next 25 years, it's going to rise, I believe, by something like 10 million is the expected amount. And if you're falling behind on making houses available, it is just making it more and more difficult. And the government are compounding that by all the legalities they're trying to bring in. And I mean, I wouldn't like to be in the situation that Richard, because what they have done to impose or restrict what the private landlords are doing, and it seems farcical to me. Just very briefly, I had a very big battle with Wiltshire Council several years ago, who didn't want me to be carrying out local authority searches because they wanted to be doing them all. As it happened, 30% of all of the work that was being coming out of local authority searches was being carried out by people like myself, the privateers. Why? Because they were taking over 8 weeks to return the searches. Well, the only reason we couldn't do it any quicker than the 4 weeks, 20 working days they gave us was because they wouldn't let us. If we could have just gone in and looked at the records, bang. Now, it's the same sort of kind of thing. It's the private landlords who make up so much of the social housing that's available at the moment. The more restriction they put on that, the more they damage their own selves in making that housing available to people and making it affordable. That's the kind of thing that Richard does. He makes the housing affordable, and he helps other people do exactly the same thing. Same with Chris. And it's great to see that happening. But we can't go around impacting, bringing out more. We need to speak to those who are doing the work for them. And I mean, I feel very, very strongly about it, actually. So I dread to think what Richard feels about the whole thing.
Richard?
Yes. Well, I sympathise with Hamish's issues as well, but which I hadn't realised to the same degree until hearing him just now. But yes, my biggest issue, problem, or one of my biggest issues, is the problem of the rise in the number of rogue landlords due to the government's strategy. Now, because they've created a vacuum, basically, of undersupplied property and over demand from tenants, which from more people coming into the country and more people being born anyway, and more people wanting to own their own house singly rather than as a couple, it's driving the opportunity for people to let out properties to desperate people, where they can charge them as much as they like. They can overcrowd them. They don't have to meet any rules. They do have to. They don't bother to meet any rules or regulations. And the money they take easily covers the paltry fines that they occasionally get. Then they also, because of what they're doing, they can grow their portfolios much faster than the responsible landlord, because of course they're taking in more money. They're buying the cheaper properties that are probably a bit run down anyway. They're not doing any repairs as such. They're just cramming them in. And so their portfolio could multiply 4 or 5 times more quickly than a normal responsible landlord. And that's why there's this problem with rogue landlords. If landlords were treated fairly and squarely by the government, and they made a real effort to build more houses, the rogue landlord problem would it would still be some, but they would virtually vanish. It would get rid of a lot of them. There's no opportunity when the majority of people can find a home from a good landlord.
Is there anything we can do to naturally otherwise repress rogue landlords, or is this just a symptom of the problem in the first place?
I actually believe it has been created by, if you like, the absence of involvement of the right strategies by a number of people. First of all, we know this all the time. It's the ludicrously small number of houses that are built to accommodate people at a reasonable sort of price. So a lot of people cannot afford them. They can actually share in the ownership, but all too often, though the rogues, in fact, it's not so bad on new properties, but what is happening, rogues are getting hold of properties. And as Richard said, they can do it more quickly because they've got their cash isn't tied up because they haven't improved the properties they have. So they're not shelling out money. So they're getting all of that rent coming in so they can afford to move. So if you like, there's a lot of things, as is happening with the legal side of properties, there's too much which is restricting the people that would actually help the situation on. And it's the introductions some of those introductions have only been in recent years. I think it was about 1918, 1919, Richard, when they really started doing some pretty daft things.
It was. I didn't really get into property until the turn of the century, though. So, but they were beginning to make inroads in there. I would say from the earlier question that we could improve the property situation slightly by stopping the. This is a contentious issue.
I do like a good contentious issue. Go on.
Well, I think we could stop the right to buy. I think that should be cancelled and allow the councils to keep their stock and allow them to purchase through other schemes more and recover.
You want to ruin the last of the Iron Lady's legacy, then?
Well, she did a lot of good for the country, but not everything was. Shall we say? It was her opinion at the time, and I'm not going to dispute that. But now, I think, looking back, I think it was the wrong. It was not. It's not the right way forward. It was her belief that everybody should own their own house. That's not turned out to be the case, and there's a lot of people actually who don't actually want to own their own house. They want to have the flexibility to move where they want.
Yes, it does seem that we are inexorably moving towards generation rent, but there is, my thoughts are that rentals just seems to be very tragically high.
But that's caused, of course, by the lack of supply.
Well, of course,
and the reduction in the number of landlords due to other issues. But if you look across Europe, people rent more than buy anyway. We're one of the few countries in Europe that had a predominantly buy ethos. Absolutely.
And now we're seeing to moving. I mean, my other thought. This is a slightly more contentious issue as well, but in a different sociological kind of manner. It was common for the children to fly the roost. Yes, that was Absolutely. The norm. But with the pandemic and also the cost of living crisis, it's become more and more normalized for multi-generational living.
Yes.
So therefore, making generation rent even more of a practicality, but a practicality for the whole family.
Absolutely. But then, a few years ago, we were in Italy on a brief holiday, and we were out eating one night. There was another family next to us. They had grandfathers, the grandparents, the parents, the children. There were 3 or 4 generations, down to babes, eating at 10, 11 o'clock at night together, because that's how they live. And it's quite nice to see the families living like that. And it builds a good family relationship because you've got multi generations in the same household almost. So I don't think that's altogether a bad thing. But generally speaking, the problem we have here is our properties are quite often smaller. If you go across Europe, certainly in Germany, the average house is slightly bigger, I think. But
I completely agree with you. I'm very lucky because I managed to sandwich together 3 old workers' houses into one, but that's unusual. Certainly, I think the norm in cities is for flats of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, which are relatively compact. Interestingly, in a further discussion with Chris yesterday, with the proposed changes as far as property development is concerned, where they're potentially going to relax the rules that allow you to effectively create extensions, wraparounds, and even raising the height of the second story extensions, that could change the whole face of existing stock. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. The permissive development rights are the government's hope to get more people building more brownfield sites, which is what I'm looking at now, because we don't have to go through months of planning. They're trying to make it easier. Of course, there are some councils who are trying to keep control of that, which is fair enough. There's no issue there. But it is giving the small developer a lot more opportunity to convert properties into habitable living again. Now, that's a good thing, because it doesn't matter how many big corporations you have. There's a limited number of them, but there are thousands, if not more, of small developers.
Quite right.
And we all build just half a dozen houses or flats a year. We could make a massive inroad to that. So by making it easier for us, they are actually doing something positive. But I think it's almost as we've got to do something. How can we do this? Oh, look, let them build anything anywhere, or almost approach. And hopefully,
I think it's stopping a little short of that, but it's certainly. Yeah. I mean, I think the first bit of ruling on PD that we came across that I had my attention drawn to was the fact that you could do things as maisonettes, for instance, rejoin them and improve upon them, again without recourse to full planning and so on. And now this, where does it end, Richard?
I don't know. I look at what I've become cynical in my old age, I suppose. So I look at what laws they brought out, and then I think, how can I use what they brought out to my benefit and to the benefit of my tenants? And that's about.
Hamish, I'd like to give you the last word on this subject before I wrap it up for today.
Well, I think it's not so much a conflict of interest. It's a divergence of what the government ought to be doing compared to what it is doing. And that is a challenge. They haven't looked at, but there again, if you look at how many government ministers have been involved in housing, I think there's more housing ministers than there are years over the last sort of 10, 12 years. There'll be more ministers than there are years in that particular sort of position.
I think there's a joke in here somewhere. How many housing ministers does it take to change it? I don't know.
But we've got big failures with levelling up, which never got levelled up at all. Everything's deteriorating.
I never understood this concept of levelling up.
The only saving grace is people like Richard.
Richard, let me go. It's a vote of confidence, you see? So look, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this. We do enjoy our sessions on a Friday. We do take one topic and we try and focus in on it. I hope we've given you some positive thoughts as well as all the cynical ones from all sides. It's not just you, Richard. But please do watch again every Friday on and around this time, usually around about 3:00 we start, and we cover topics that some people are frightened to perhaps bring to the public attention, and we'll be doing it more and more. If you want to hear more of these, we ask that you contact us, or at least when I constantly get people coming up to me and saying, I really like what you're talking about. Well, tell me a direction you'd like it to take, or give us some ideas. But until the next time, thank you very much, Richard, for joining us today. I hope you don't mind returning at some point in the future where we can quiz your non-cynical brain about movements in the property industry. And of course, our esteemed leader, Hamish McLay, thank you very much for this very good idea. And from me, Gareth Maxim of the Many Purple Hats, I wish you all well. And of course, a wonderful weekend and good mental health. Goodbye all.